There we go. Okay. All right. So again, welcome and thank you for being here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Natalie Alwish, and I am the Executive Director of Humane Action Pittsburgh, also known as Humane Action Pennsylvania. And as you know, today we're going to be discussing House Bill 1210 and how you can help, whether you're an individual or here on behalf of an organization, move this bill forward. Before we get to that, though, I just want to mention a few housekeeping items. So, one, please mute yourself if you haven't already, just so that if you have any background noise, it won't distract from our discussion. If you have any questions at any point, please do feel free to put those in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat along with Emilio Posa, who is Humane Action Pittsburgh's Companion Animal Program Manager. And then we'll get to the questions at the end. And also, as you probably heard when it popped up and said this is being recorded, I am recording this session. It'll be made available to you after the meeting in case you want to share it with your networks. If you aren't familiar with Humane Action Pittsburgh, I just want to take a very brief moment to tell you a little bit more about our organization. Our vision, so, what we want the world to be when we don't need to exist anymore, is a world without animal suffering, where all beings are treated with compassion. Our mission is to unite and empower diverse communities to advance the protections of all animals by promoting a holistic understanding of how animal welfare interconnects with other pressing societal matters. And what does that actually mean? It means we work on education and policy by engaging, animal welfare advocates, but also non-traditional advocates, such as, law enforcement, environmental organizations, human-centered organizations, like a lot of you are here representing today. Because, animal welfare issues are interconnected with so many other societal issues. And our Ending Canine Cruelty Coalition, which you can all be a part of if you're not already, we are looking to help companion animals in the Commonwealth through various means, including, this bill that we're here to talk about. So we'll talk a little bit more about the coalition later, and you'll also receive some follow-up information to learn more. But now I would like to introduce our esteemed speakers today. First, we have Elizabeth Ringler Gianthan. She is a volunteer with Humane Action Pittsburgh, and she's also a licensed clinical social worker. She works as a therapist and social worker in the Pittsburgh area, mainly with trauma survivors, including those who have experienced domestic violence and sexual trauma, as well as forced migrant populations. Elizabeth has published and presented best practices in implementing trauma-informed care. And she's also a doctoral candidate with Barry University's School of Social Work. And you'll be hearing from Elizabeth shortly a little bit more about that connection between animal abuse and violence against humans and, why we're all here today. Our next speaker is State Representative Natalie Mihalik. She currently serves the 40th Legislative District, which, if you're not familiar, serves part of Allegheny and Washington counties here in the west side of the state. She serves on committees for appropriations, consumer protection, and insurance. She's a native of Allegheny County and a veteran. And after earning her bachelor's and law degrees, she's worked extensively in criminal justice. So she's really tied close to this issue that we're here to discuss today. And finally, we have Representative Christina Sappi. She currently serves the 158th Legislative District, so the other side of the state from us in Pittsburgh and Chester County. She serves on committees for agriculture and rural affairs, local government, tourism, and veterans affairs. She worked in the private sector and then as a staffer in both the PA House and Senate for many years before being elected to office. And I feel like this is so cool. She's the first woman and first Democrat to serve her district. And before I pass it over to Elizabeth, I just want to add, these two representatives really exemplify what we should all be looking for in our legislators today. I've worked with both of them over the past couple of years on this bill, and I've really seen firsthand how committed they are to this cause. So they're really what all legislators should be striving for in terms of being able to work in a bipartisan or nonpartisan manner to advance priorities that really matter for humans and animals. So thank you both so much for everything you've done and continue to do to help, move this bill forward to help survivors of violence, both, human and animal. Great. So, Elizabeth, I'm going to pass it to you to talk a little bit more about the actual issue at hand.
Thank you, Natalie, and thank you to everyone who is attending today. As Natalie mentioned, I'm a social worker, and I think for individuals who are working directly with people who are going into homes, it's something that's evident, that there is a link between violence perpetrated against animals and violence perpetrated against people, and this is also reflected in the research that we see. Unfortunately, for individuals who are experiencing domestic violence, their abuser may use the threat of harming animals as a way to, demonstrate their control over the person, so that they feel that they aren't able to leave because they don't know what will happen to a beloved pet of theirs, or a way to keep them, kind of under that control of the abuser. Some of the research has shown that 71% of domestic violence victims report that the abuser will also target pets. And again, sadly, 76% of incidents involving animal abuse involve children witnessing this act. And of course, that's of concern, for how that impacts developing brains in children, to have to witness something like that happening. And interestingly, investigation of animal abuse may be the first point of entry in identifying that there is domestic violence that's happening in the home.
Sorry, I couldn't find my unmute button. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And if anybody has any questions, please, again, feel free to put them in the chat. Elizabeth will be able to address them when we're finished. So now I'd like to pass it over to Representative Sappy and Representative Mihalik to talk specifically about what House Bill 1210 does. Some of you might not know, or maybe you do know but need a refresher. And then also to talk about how, again, individuals on this call and also organizations can help to get this bill through the legislature. So, representatives, I will pass it to you.
Well, look, my friend here has her friend with her. That is such a sweet friend. Anyway, thanks so much for having both Natalie and myself today. And it has been such a pleasure to work with her and with all of you on this legislation for this is our second term working on this bill. We've gotten it through the House, and there is such a link between trauma and domestic violence and animal abuse. And I'm really happy that Elizabeth is here today and brings her knowledge of trauma and adverse childhood experiences to this topic. I think a lot of you may remember Senator Dinniman. He was one of the senators I worked for, and I was actually working on trauma-informed policy at the time for him. And I think probably a lot of you advocated for addressing the portion of domestic violence that includes animal abuse in his office at some point. And so when I came into office, this was something that I was very interested in seeing through. And obviously Representative Mihalik's background is, so important in getting this done. So I was just, I think we made a great team in getting this done, and she brings so much to the issue too. I'm going to just let her kind of fill in here too. I don't want to take up all the oxygen.
No, all good. And it's been a pleasure to work with Humane Action Pennsylvania, as well as you, Representative Sappy. You've been just a tremendous partner on this issue. And we actually got House Bill 1210 through the House almost a year ago. So now our focus is on the Senate. This is my friend Simon here, who desperately needs a haircut. But we are really hopeful that we could, with your advocacy, all of you on the call today, and just pushing this forward in the Senate, because that's ultimately what we need for it to go in front of the governor for a signature. And I feel really good about getting it done this term. This is our second term now working on this bill. And we know that it's so important because there is such a high correspondence to abuse of the animal when there is already abuse in the home. And on top of that, it's really a barrier to many victims that are looking for a way out, looking for help. They don't want to leave the pet behind. And that was really the whole intent behind this legislation, was to remove another barrier that exists between getting the help they need and getting the victims away from that abuse. I really want to thank you to the other Natalie on the call. She's been just a tremendous advocate and really helping keep Christine and I on the path to success for this House bill. It's crazy, chaotic times in politics in Harrisburg, and this is one of those issues that lends itself to not only bipartisanship, but really to something that everybody can feel good about at the end of the day. This is just a solid piece of legislation, and I've just been honored to be able to work on it to help these victims who are out there suffering under the hand of an abuser and just remove one additional barrier for them.
And I think a lot of people on the call today who are advocates and volunteers for Humane PA or volunteering or advocating in the domestic violence world understand this connection. But I have to tell you, as somebody who, does not have a legal background and did not previously work in the domestic violence world, I did not understand the connection between animal abuse and domestic violence. And so I think it's really important, as we're trying to get this legislation passed, to understand that not everybody who, without a judicial or legal background or the advocacy work on their side, there are a lot of people out there that would like to see this happen that may not understand the high incidence of animal abuse in domestic violence cases. It is well substantiated, and it's something that I think, again, we need to underscore when we're trying to get this done, and we're working with elected officials that may not understand that this is real. This really does happen, and it's horrific, and we need to address it.
And I think that's exactly what we're asking all of you on the call today to reiterate, either to your home state senator, if you belong to an advocacy organization that has the ability to request a meeting with the judiciary chair or other senators in leadership. That's really the point that we need to drive home. Like, this isn't just addressing animal abuse. This is removing a barrier for these victims because of that high correlation between abuse in the home and abuse of the animal. But I think Christine just really hit the nail on the head with highlighting that. And that's really where we need your help to communicate that to the senators that are ultimately going to make or break this piece of legislation this term. And right now it's sitting in the Senate Judiciary Committee. So if you have the ability to contact Senator Lisa Baker or other members of the state Senate, depending on where you live, what part of the state you're in, and just encourage them to encourage Senator Baker that we really want to see this up for a vote, and we would love to see it up for a vote sometime in the very near future.
Rep Sappy and Mihalik, could you guys, before we talk more about what the people on this call can do, could you maybe discuss any misconceptions about the bill? I know, we've talked about some that we've heard from different legislators or members of the public, just, in case the people on this call are having conversations with their legislators so they can address that if it were to come up. And I'm happy to remind you of what some of those misconceptions are if if you need me to.
One of the items that was brought up to Rep Sappy and myself on a recent meeting on the Senate side was, okay, there's a man, he has a dog. Now, woman moves in, man starts beating woman wants to leave. If this bill were actually passed and put into law, what happens to that animal? Because the man owns the animal. look, we want to protect the victim and we want to protect the animal. This is actually addressed in the bill itself, and I know Christine can speak a little more to that. Number one, it wasn't, really a concern. We wanted to remove whoever was being abused, human or animal, from that situation, and this bill does just that.
So, and again, just sort of backing up for a second and thinking about the abuse that would be happening in that home. The woman had moved in and it wasn't her pet originally. The ownership issue is, as Natalie just mentioned, is addressed here by giving temporary ownership. And this is over here on the slide deck in the fourth bullet point here. It grants temporary ownership rights over a companion animal and directs the defendant from possessing, contacting, attempting to contact, transferring or relocating the companion animal, or entering the property of any person sheltering the companion animal at that time. So we've really sort of made it tight and very clear what happens in this instance, so that getting your protection from abuse order, before a judge, the judge knows exactly what's happening here.
We've heard from, oh, I'm sorry, Rep. Mihalik, please.
I think the only other concern that we've heard, and it's not been frequent, is just, is this bill necessary? And we heard that on many pieces of legislation. Is this necessary? I worked both as a prosecutor and then on the defense side. I represented a number of victims, in PFA hearings, and this is absolutely necessary. We had, the last issue brought up by someone that was a former prosecutor. And during my days in the DA's office, I didn't really see that connection with the animal. That wasn't relevant to the case. We were there to, prosecute an assault or a harassment or whatever the charge was. And it wasn't really, discussed what else was going on in the home. It wasn't until I had some experience in private practice and actually going into PFA court 3 days a week, that the victims would really open up about all of these other things that were going on in the home, because that was really what we were looking to address through the PFA order. This would be a huge victory for so many of those victims, and having that language within the PFA, and knowing that that pet is going to, have safety as well as the victim.
I know Humane Action Pittsburgh has heard questions, concerns maybe that if pets are allowed to be included in PFAs, there's often not a place for them to go, because there are a lot of human shelters and places for human victims to go that don't necessarily accommodate pets. I'm happy to say that there are a lot of places that do. I think even some of them are represent on this call today, either human shelters that are helping survivors that do accommodate pets, or have partnerships with animal shelters where they're able to get temporary foster care. But can you guys expand on why, even though maybe there aren't as many resources out there as we'd like right now for pets in crisis, this is still an important bill to move forward?
Well, I actually, speaking with domestic violence advocates this week in Harrisburg, we talked a lot about the need for housing for victims that include the animal. And it's also just a matter of the right way to protect and shelter victims of domestic violence, human victims. Sometimes it's dormitory style, sometimes it's multi-family dwellings. But starting over, you've gotten to the point where you've left your abuser, and you've maybe perhaps taken children and an animal with you. The best way to start over is actually in a small unit of your own. And so I think that's something that I'd like to see going forward as a goal in the domestic violence advocacy world, is finding appropriate housing for victims that really sets them back on the path to recovery and safety. And that, that will include, the ability for them to have a pet that would not necessarily, be in a housing situation with families that didn't have pets, et cetera. So that's something that I'm looking forward to working on in conjunction with this effort.
That's a great point, and we are doing a letter to leadership and appropriation staff to increase the line item in the budget for domestic violence services. Please sign on.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for leading on that as well. I have another question. We've had questions from advocates who have asked how exactly is companion animal defined in this bill or in code. So I'm wondering if you can speak at all to that.
I think Rep. Mihaela could probably handle that one better than I could.
Yeah, and I don't know that I can pull it up right now. And correct me if I'm wrong, Christine, but I believe that it is defined in another area of law, and we had just mirrored that language.
So just
think
in
you're
line
probably
with
right.
how any other statute would define companion animal.
We didn't reinvent the wheel for it.
Right. Thank you for that clarification. Okay. So how can the people on this call, I know you both alluded to it a bit, but just to make it very concrete, we're talking again with individuals here, not necessarily representing an organization, but also those that are here representing organizations today.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is getting this first hurdle passed in the Senate, and that would be through a committee meeting. So we would need Senator Lisa Baker as the Judiciary Chair, and we would need her office to be contacted, as well as the other senators who sit on that committee, because they can obviously influence Senator Baker in the type of legislation that she's running. We know that Senator Dan Laughlin from the Erie area has a special interest in this legislation. He's actually introduced similar legislation of his own. We've spoken to him, and he wants to see this bill through. So he would be a great person to contact if you're in that area, or even if you're not, just to know that there is support out there on this issue. And perhaps he can be of help with Senator Baker and her decision of whether or not to run the bill.
And you can probably, I mean, I know you can find the members of the Judiciary Committee in the Senate by just Googling PA Senate Judiciary Committee and understanding committees, and it'll show you who the members of that committee are. And it's the majority members, you want to reach all of the members on that committee.
And I know a lot of people on this call are, really seasoned advocates, and they know their legislators well, and probably have their cell numbers. But for those of you that haven't, or that aren't necessarily experienced, we are going to be sending a follow-up email where we'll reiterate all this information, include links for how you can find these people, talking points, and Humane Action Pittsburgh is happy to even just work with you one-on-one to help you craft your message if that's something that would be helpful. Rep. Sapi and Mihalik, is there anything else that you want to share before I just talk a little bit about our coalition and then we open it up to questions?
I'm just going to say that it's really critical. I mean, we're heading into the middle of May. The state budget is due June 30th. And so all eyes will be shifting towards the budget in the next few weeks. And so that really does sort of start the clock in terms of legislation that's going to run this spring before we come back in the fall. So it would be really great if folks could start advocating immediately to get this through the Senate Judiciary Committee. Because once we get into fall, I think people will be very distracted with the election, and then all legislation dies on November 30th. This is the end of the term. So we would have to reintroduce this in 2025 and start the clock all over again. So there is sort of an urgency around advocating for this right now.
So as I alluded to, Humane Action Pittsburgh, we do have what's called our Ending Canine Cruelty Coalition, which everyone, both individuals and organizations, are invited to join. We'll help you stay up to date on this bill and others, involving companion animal welfare in the Commonwealth. We, as I mentioned, are going to be sending a follow-up email to this where we'll share resources on, what exactly does it mean to join and how you can join. I'm just going to very briefly outline some of that right now. So, we work in policy because lawmaking, it is really key to solving animal problems. I know a lot of you on the call today are in rescue, which is so, so important. Doing direct care, whether it's direct care of humans or animals. Lawmaking helps, hopefully, ideally, prevent the need for some of that rescue. So, by joining our Ending Canine Cruelty Coalition, Humane Action Pittsburgh will keep you up to date on how to use your voice for effective change. We know you're all so incredibly busy, whether you are, working directly with human survivors of violence or, in an animal shelter or rescue world, or maybe you're not either, but just juggling a million priorities of your life. So we try to make it easy for people to take really meaningful action, but with, a limited time commitment. We always say we're the organization for busy people to make a difference. All of the information on how to join is on our website, humaneactionpittsburgh.org. And, we're also going to be sending it out. And of course, you can always feel free to contact me, natalie.a@humaneactionpittsburgh.org. Okay. Emilio is our Ending Canine Cruelty Coalition lead as our program manager for companion animal welfare. So he's actually probably the person that you're going to hear from. But anyway, without further ado, again, thank you all so much for being here and taking time out of your busy day to learn more about the bill and how you can help. We are going to open it up for questions. So if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat, or also feel free to unmute. And
Sorry,
thank you. I see that.
I'm very sorry. I just put in the chat all the names of the Judiciary Committee in Pennsylvania. I was just hearing that we couldn't remember all the names, so I just looked it up and put it in the chat.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much,
So
Katie.
helpful.
Yeah, and we'll include that in our follow-up email as well. Yeah, there are quite a few. So thank you so much for that, Katie. I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, Judy. I just saw you pop up. So please. Did you have a question, Judy?
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I guess you just popped up for another reason. I just wanted to ask both representatives, you spoke a little bit about this, but what inspired you to work on this issue?
I think it's the work that I was doing as a Senate staffer before I got elected. This issue, we were really starting to work on adverse childhood experiences, trauma-informed systems, trauma-informed education. This is going back to the mid-early 2000s. And so that work was really starting to get some traction in Harrisburg. And I do believe it's the advocates who brought the animal welfare component to that work to the senator that I was working for that got my interest. So, and then, to see how many years went by and this wasn't getting done was something that really inspired me. And Rep. Mihalik is a great partner. And I just, I knew I wanted to work with her on this.
Rep. Mihalik, what about you? Was it just your work, when you were, working on PFAs for your clients?
Yeah, it was something that was always in the back of my mind. And then coming to the House of Representatives, I was able to work on a number of pieces of legislation right out the gate, dealing with human trafficking, other domestic violence related issues, getting victims help for like a landlord-tenant act when they have to move out of the home quickly, getting those unemployment benefits, the whole 9 yards. So this was just another piece of the pie to really remove some of these barriers for victims coming forward.
Well, thank you both again for taking this on and your dedication. Do we have any other questions? Again, feel free to put them in the chat or you can unmute.
Hello, this is Karen Drennan. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hi, Karen.
Hi, I personally was a victim of domestic violence in 2000. And I had a situation where a boyfriend at the time that was living with me, we had an altercation and he got a gun and I had to get out of the house and I had 2 dogs. And I eventually wound up at the women's shelter of Pittsburgh, which I was very grateful for. I did have to leave my dogs in the house. And one of them was actually one of them was his dog and one of them was my dog. The problem I had was I had to call the police as soon as I left. And when I came back to my house, there was like 10 police cars and 2 ambulances. And I had to park at the very end of my street to even get to my house. And I had a good response. And I went to the police and I said, meanwhile, my ex called me while I was waiting for the police to show up. And he said he wasn't in the house. So I went down to my house and the police officer, he said, there's noise in there. And he said, he's in the house. And I said, no, he's not in the house. He called me. He said, he's not there. He said, I said, there's 2 dogs in there though. And one's mine and one's his. And he goes, well, we're going to have to take the dogs out. And I was like, I said, I do not want you to kill my dogs. I said, I was so upset about that. And it was a weird situation, but I said, I knew he was not there. I knew where, he said he wasn't there and I didn't think he would want to do any harm to his dog. So I personally said, I'm going to have to go in. I said, and they said, okay. And I opened the door and he was not in there. The gun was in there, was laying on the couch and the TV was on. So that was like, the police were just, I was very upset about that part of it because I had to take a chance, and go in there. And I just thought, why, that first instinct on them was we're taking the dogs out. And I just thought that was not a good decision on their part. I understand my safety and everything like that, but it really was, a very, but in the meantime, a police officer did help me in the very end. And I did file a PFA and I did have to leave after I filed the PFA because that's the most dangerous time when you file a PFA. And then that's when I went to the women's shelter. So, I just wanted to reiterate that this happened to me personally. And I appreciate having this bill. I think it's a wonderful bill and I will support it.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Karen, for sharing that and, for being a survivor and, helping your pets. And I know that I'm sure, as those of us who've worked in policy before, passing legislation is really step one. And then you have to work, with all of the stakeholders to make sure everyone knows about the new bill and understands the new bill. So, hopefully we can get this bill through and then it'll be on all of us to help educate, our law enforcement agencies and the others that need to know about it, that this is a law that exists. But you have to get to the Senate first. Any other questions?
I know that the term that you're using in the bill is companion animal. Is that similar to how they would treat like an emotional support animal? Because I know that's different than a service animal. So in like the levels of care, like would you be able to take the dog or the pet with you because they're a companion animal? And maybe that would like take some red tape away, like the emotional support animal, or is it a little bit different?
No, it's not going to be as arduous as proving that it is a service animal, because that is obviously different layers of bureaucracy there with the service animal. Companion animal is actually more vague than that, and it could cover a number of, if it's emotional support, it doesn't have to be defined that way, but it would cover it. It would cover obviously a service animal, but it was intentionally vague. And taken from another area of law so that it was already an established definition.
Good. Awesome. Thank you.
Any other questions? Right. Well, again, thank you so much to Elizabeth and Reps Sappy and Mihalik for being here today. And especially thank you to everyone who attended. As I mentioned, we will be following up with you probably early next week to just recap all of this information and give you those tangible next steps. And please do feel free to reach out to Humane Action Pittsburgh anytime if you have any questions, concerns. We'll do our best to work with everyone. So thank you, and everyone have a great weekend.
Thanks so much, everyone.